Welcome to the Contemporary Music Centre here on Fishamble Street. Contemporary Music Centre documents, develops and promotes the works of Irish composers. My name is Evonne Ferguson, I'm the director here, and usually on Culture Night we're welcoming you through our doors here on 19 Fishamble Street. This year we're online with a series of features about our Composer Hub project. And this project was developed with our Ensemble-in-Residence, the wonderful Kirkos Ensemble. We're going to hear from Kirkos Artistic Director Sebastian Adams, from the 5 participating early career composers in the Composer Hub project, along with the mentor composers, a series of established Irish composers who have mentored our younger composers along the way across the many months of the Composer Hub project. Joining me first this evening on Culture Night 2020 is Sebastian Adams. You're very welcome along, Sebastian.
Thanks.
Sebastian is a CMC composer and artistic director of Kirkos, who are CMC's Ensemble-in-Residence for this year. Sebastian, it's been a kind of an interesting thing to be the Ensemble-in-Residence this year. It's a new initiative for CMC and we were really excited about it, both CMC and Kirkos. But of course you haven't actually been able to be resident here in 19 Fishamble Street. We've had to kind of rethink that. But the project as we thought of it has progressed, and you've been able to creatively collaborate with 5 composers and the ensemble and the Kirkos Ensemble.
Yeah, in fact, in terms of the creative output, it's really going exactly as we planned. It's just the context is quite different. And I guess because it's emerging composers who are involved, there was always going to be a focus on documentation, because that's one of the things that young composers need in order to be able to show their music to a broad audience, is basically to have good quality videos. And so even without a pandemic, that would have always been part of the plan.
Yeah, and we're going to see the videos and hear from the composers in their videos a little bit later on. But tell us, I mean, you did have the workshops in person, and we had to enlist our friends at Dance House to help us out there because our own space here wasn't big enough. And you had the 5 composers, some of them in person came to the workshops and some of them were on Zoom. And that was the first time for the ensemble to see the works.
Yes, so it's 5 composers from very different kind of parts of the contemporary music scene. And so the types of pieces that have been delivered are like massively different from one another, which was one of the interesting things. And as you said, some of the composers were online only. I think 3 composers came in person, and it was kind of weird working with the other 2. It depended so much on internet connection and you know, the personal thing of doing a workshop with a composer who you, at least I knew all the composers already, but most of the performers mightn't have known some of them. And so that was kind of a hurdle we had to get over. Yeah,
building that personal kind of connection online very quickly. Yeah, in the space of like an hour-long workshop.
Exactly, yeah. So we ended up bonding through awkwardness, kind of. But yeah, that was a challenge for particularly one workshop. Just we really had trouble getting a clear connection, and so it was difficult to get a lot done in that slot. So then I kind of talked it over with the composers, and we came up with alternate ways of working so that we didn't have to rely on the internet connection so much, like recording stuff in advance and then talking in the middle.
Yeah, I suppose it's that time, isn't it, where we're having to just rethink our way of doing everything, and things seem to take much longer at the moment.
And you have to think it all up on the fly as well, because you're not working from a kind of established plan.
But these 5 composers that are part of the Composer Hub, which is this project as our Ensemble-in-Residence, I mean, they're 5 exciting compositional voices in your opinion. I mean, what's kind of drawn you to the 5? You know, there's Ultan O'Brien, Áine Mallon, and they're the 2 CMC emerging composers for this year, and then Susan Geaney, Seán O'Donnell and Darragh Kelly, and they're all, as you say, from different kind of ends of the diverse spectrum of contemporary music in Ireland, based in different places, both here in Ireland and the UK. But what's exciting about them for Kirkos, Sebastian?
Well, I can kind of split them into 2 camps, because there's the 2 CMC composers who were brought to us by you, who actually I didn't know their work that well, although I had met them both in the past. And so what's been really nice about working with Áine and Ultan has been getting a totally new composer to us and getting into their music. And both of them really are actually quite... we don't really have any other composers that we've worked with that are that similar to either of them, so it's quite nice to be stepping into that territory. Okay. Ultan's piece is this kind of mini opera with a spoken word part about owls, and it's a very interesting mixture between a kind of a little bit of a traditional Irish sound world, not too much because he's a trad fiddler, so you might assume that would be the predominant thing, but actually it's kind of an undertone rather than the main thing, I think. And then this sort of kind of tonal but contemporary harmonic language, and a lot of busy gleaming textures all the time, which is like fantastic instrumentation, and it's just has been really enjoyable for everyone to work on that, I think. And then Áine's piece was also something I hadn't really come across before, which is basically it's a meditation, but we've done quite a lot of kind of meditative music coming from schools of composition like deep listening, where it's very much about the I guess the spiritual side or the listening side. And what's interesting with Áine's piece is she's essentially found a way of doing that in a way that is much closer to a kind of conventionally notated piece, where it's the audience are actually invited to breathe with the performers with the aid of a kind of video, a breathing circle thing that moves in and out. And so you have this interesting experience of a kind of guided meditation, but with a notated piece playing on top of it, which I think is also something I haven't seen before. So that's two really interesting different pieces from from the people we didn't choose. So that's been so nice because it's always good to have your own horizons opened. Yeah,
because it was a real collaborative, I suppose, thing for us, for CMC and Kirkos, in terms of, selecting 5 composers to participate in this kind of opportunity with Kirkos. Yeah. And, there's the workshops, which you've had a few weeks back, and also then you have a planned recording of the works. And I mean, the original idea was to have a live performance with the audience, but I think what you were telling me earlier is really interesting about the pieces themselves have now kind of suggested quite different ways of dissemination to you.
Yeah, so I think that probably reflects the way we went about the whole thing, which I think was the thing that I was most keen on the whole time, was making sure it's a very open blank slate for the composers, which was partly because having been through loads of sort of emerging composer type opportunities myself, I find that they tend to close you down into a particular kind of way of writing because of things like time constraints, or just the organisers wanting to make it easy for themselves. And what happens then is you have the kind of probably the most radical composers, because they're the ones who are going to define the sound of tomorrow. The composers who maybe haven't found their voices yet, but will be the ones whose voices later inspire other composers, what happens is these people who have these new ideas are being forced to write very often in the most conventional, traditional ways, string quartet opportunities, short pieces, and these are all great things, obviously, but the thing is, if you get to your 10th short chamber piece, you might have kind of used up all your good ideas, or you might feel ready for a different challenge. So when I was discussing this with you in the early stages of the project, that was one of the things I was hoping we would manage to keep, and we did. Yeah. So what we have is like 5 pieces that almost certainly won't all work in the same way, like in the same context. So like Susan Geaney, who is one of the composers that Kirkos brought in, her piece is like a kind of half an hour long melt of glissandi. It's called tape melt, and it kind of revolves around the idea, or the concept of kind of damaged VHS tape. So it's all these like swirling, overlapping glissandi in different instruments around at the same few pitches, with tape parts that Susan made herself with a variety of sounds, including speech and also other similar glissandis and I think other things. I haven't really worked it out because the way we were doing it in the workshop anyway, Susan's tapes were sort of embedded in the middle of the volume of the group, so it was hard to actually hear the tape in isolation, and it was more sort of suggesting things, bringing out things in the other instruments. So her piece is, I feel, going to work really well live and will be quite hard to get the full effect of in a video. I think it's the sort of thing you really need to be present for. So we probably will try and prioritise some kind of live performance for that, if at all possible. Whereas Darragh Kelly's piece is totally different. It's like, well, still quite early in his process, I think, for it. But basically, he's going to overlay these like Snapchat filters, and he has ideas of making coronavirus covers for some of the wind instruments, which he's going to have green screen stuff on. So I think he's going to overlay other kind of digital stuff on that. And so that piece will have to be totally rethought before it works live, I think.
Yes.
And I think he is thinking about that as well, but it's, video
Yeah, different
first.
versions of the pieces, really. It will have to happen. Yeah.
So, that's the two extremes probably of context, but they all fit in different places along that spectrum. And Seán O'Dowley's piece really is just, at the moment, I think, an exploration rather than a piece. I don't know if he plans to get it to the point of having a finished piece by December.
And it's for horn, I think, Seán's piece?
I'm not even sure yet, because what
he's probably not quite sure yet.
Well, maybe, yeah. I think that shifted a lot when he was being mentored by Ann Cleare about it. But what he's doing is a lovely idea. It's basically exploring the sounds and visuals of disassembling and reassembling the instruments. So, yeah, maybe you saw the horn video, because that was particularly nice. It was like, there are a lot of bits you can take apart on the horn very easily, and they lay out nicely, and they produce very small sounds. And so I think his plan is to explore that just as far as he can go in extreme detail.
It was, you mentioned, you just referred there to the fact that Seán was being mentored by Ann Cleare, and I liked the way you spoke about voices that will be inspiring for the future, and that I suppose together we're trying to nurture these 5 new compositional voices. And when we were talking through different aspects of the projects, you were very keen on these composers having a mentor, an established Irish composer who could really, I suppose, help them reach the potential and see all the potentials, as you say, with this kind of breadth that you were offering them with the 5 performers of Kirkos. So they all kind of selected their wish list composer, and they all got that wish list, which was very generous of the mentors, and we're going to have a discussion with some of the mentors a little bit later on in the evening. But why was that so key? Because you when we were discussing this project, you said, this, I'm really keen on this, Evonne. I really want these composers to have this mentorship opportunity. Yeah,
that was partly because it was an obvious connection that the Contemporary Music Centre could set up, where you have such good relationships with most of the top Irish composers, so you have the ability to kind of get in touch with these people and have a good chance that they'll say yes. So that was part of it. But also, I guess, if you go to somebody, like the people that they've picked are such inspirational composers, with like hugely individual ways of looking at everything. I've actually had private lessons with 2 of them, with Jennifer and Donnacha, and in both those cases I felt afterwards it wasn't like the result of just sitting down for an hour with somebody and talking. It was actually like almost a paradigm shift in what I was doing as a composer. And so if you kind of bounce your ideas off somebody like that for an hour, and they bounce ideas back at you, what you're going to come up with at the end is going to be like a sort of supercharge of your process, because it's a very quick way to see what works and what doesn't work, especially if you're talking to somebody who is already an influence on you, which is what will be the case with all these composers, because they picked them.
Yeah, well, I'm getting very good feedback about all the mentorship,
So.
both from the mentors and from the composers
Oh,
who've been mentored, and so much more to look forward to in this project, Sebastian, that you've talked about there, the recordings and all the challenges, but exciting creative challenges that we're going to have to face for the kind of broader dissemination of the completed works, and we're really looking forward to that. So it's been just really great to have Kirkos as the Ensemble-in-Residence so far, and as I say, we're looking forward to the rest of the project.
Me too.
Here at CMC on Culture Night, we're presenting an evening of features on the Composer Hub project, which is a project as part of our Ensemble-in-Residence initiative with the wonderful Kirkos Ensemble as CMC's Ensemble-in-Residence for 2020 and 2021. And we've just heard from Sebastian Adams, the Artistic Director of Kirkos, in our chat about the Composer Hub project and the early career composers who are involved. And we're going to hear now from the mentor composers on the project: Ann Cleare, Deirdre Gribbin, Power and Jennifer Walshe, and Donnacha Dennehy, the fifth mentor, wasn't available to join us for the discussion this evening. You're very welcome, ladies, to Culture Night here at CMC, and I'm thrilled that you could join us for the discussion on mentoring of new talent, and for all your generosity of spirit towards the project and mentoring these early career composers. You know, thinking of mentorship and especially strong women mentors like yourself, I suppose Nadia Boulanger kind of comes to mind very quickly. And I was interested when I read a quote from her where somebody who knew her said she saw teaching as a pleasure, a privilege and a duty. And she said, no one is obliged to give lessons. If it poisons your life and it bores you, then, you know, don't bother. And you are all currently teachers of composition at third level. So I'm wondering, you know, can one teach an art form? Is it possible? Deirdre?
Well, I love teaching, and I love the idea that you are interfacing with lots of new thinkers, and I see very much my role as someone who is an enabler rather than, I would say, a teacher. And the idea of mentor really comes into the teaching aspect of it. Of course, is the technical part of it, but it's about giving the student the confidence and the tools in a way to be able to follow through on their own thoughts. So although you're not necessarily teaching the art form, I'm possibly teaching this notion that the art form can really come alive if they have the confidence and the technique, of course, to make that possible.
Do you agree with that? You're an enabler.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I suppose I see it a bit as really just helping someone. Often myself, I found it good to try and verbalize ideas is a very good thing, you know, to put them kind of outside of your head into the world, to try to find language for them. That's always been very helpful to me as a student when I've been on the other side of mentorship. And yeah, I think it's about kind of talking to the person about how they make something. I mean, you can have an idea, but you know, there's a big question then about how you make the piece, because that can lead you in all kinds of directions and allow you to do all kinds of things, or maybe not allow you to do certain things. So I think it's about maybe exploring an idea together and then working out a way to make a piece happen, and to make it happen in a way that's interesting for the artist involved.
Jenny, in terms of, you know, your own teaching, I mean, you're teaching between London and also Stuttgart. I mean, you know, so you've kind of a great diversity of students who are coming to you for lessons and for for mentorship and for nurturing? I mean, do you see a kind of different approach maybe in the students you have in the UK and the students you have in Stuttgart?
I think to make it super clear, so I don't teach in London anymore. I'm a professor at the Hochschule for the University for Music and the Performing Arts in Stuttgart. And the teaching that I do there is very wide ranging, in that my students range from, they often come from inside the Hochschule, but they also come from the art school, or they might even come from the design academy. So that it suits me very, very well. I agree completely with what Deirdre and Anne say, in that I really do feel it's just sort of trying to see what the student wants to do and just help them do it. My old teacher, Amnon Volman, he's gay, and he used to say, teaching is like somebody is in an aesthetic closet. And he said, you just want them to feel comfortable enough with what they really want to do and who they really are, so that they can step outside. And so your job is to help them to develop whatever technique is most pertinent to them. And it's going to be a different technique for every student. So it keeps me on my toes, because I might have one student who's doing something, but maybe writing a piece with a video part, and then the next student is writing something that's text-based, and then another student is writing a piece for orchestra and with no movement, no extra musical elements, and then another student is doing a sound installation. But I like it because I think there's a much more diverse range of techniques being employed by young composers nowadays than there might have been 20 years ago. And so it's like, I still am a complete ex-product of a Catholic school education, you know, where my sort of attitude is, okay, you want to use video in your piece, then you have to make a really, really good video. You can't just skimp on it because you're a composer and get away with that. So I'm sort of a hard ass with my students. But I think, like, that's the point, is that you just want to push them to be the best version of what they can be, to do the best version of what they're interested in doing, rather than sort of a top-down technique where you say, okay, I need you to go and, you know, write pieces based on these intervals, unless you feel that that's the appropriate, you know, sort of approach.
Yeah. Just to that diversity, Karen, you're a part of the team on the experimental sound practice course, the Masters in Cork, in the Department of Music there. So you have a very kind of specific student who has, you know, made, I suppose, an investment to study on that Masters.
Yeah, so I suppose in some ways, yes, we have a very specific student, but in other ways we have a very unspecific student. So the Masters has been running, it's going into his third year. And, you know, we've had photographers who are interested in sound. We've had videographers, writers, film. So it kind of, everything that's been said here is completely, I would echo it all, and it kind of has all been said. I think Jenny's last comment is where I'll sort of launch from, in that I find the biggest challenge of teaching is knowing when a student is ready to be pushed. So, you know, that sort of, yes, we're basically there to act as a kind of a fluffy cloud that will kind of protect and hold and allow them to develop. But we're also there, I think, as something that they don't yet know that they don't yet know. And so it's kind of our job to be continually, subtly edging out, so that eventually, I mean, for me anyway, one of the best results of a student is when they, you know, sort of come around with this weird concoction idea of a piece that they had started, and it's suddenly taken these sort of right and left turns, and you know that they couldn't have got there at that earlier stage, that they weren't ready for it, and so it's, for me, it's a kind of, I suppose, something that's really wonderful to experience and to kind of see as the student changes and as they're kind of constantly becoming more ambitious about what it is they're looking to achieve. And of course, it's not a, I say it's a growth process, but of course it's not necessarily a linear one. You know, I've known students who have come back, you know, and sort of touched on something that maybe they experienced through a class 4 years ago. But at that stage they weren't ready to hear it, but somehow a part of it stuck in there. And then they come back at you and they sort of say, so this is now something that I'm prepared to use. And I think that's, for me, that's education at its best.
Well, let's hear from Susan
Geaney now, who you've mentored in the Composer Hub project, Karen, and she does refer to these left and right turns that sometimes happen in the development of a piece.
My name is Susan Geaney and I'm a composer, improviser and sound artist from Kerry, currently based in Dublin. My sound practice is very rooted in a lot of meditative practices like deep listening. I write a lot of sonic meditation pieces, text scores, sometimes that are very short and kind of more fluxus in style. One of the biggest challenges for me in composition is how I communicate the kind of concepts onto paper. We have a level 1, as we come up to level 2, we'll stay there for a minute, we're bringing it up. Let's try and bring up one more level, not full energy yet, so we'll try and bring up one more level on what you're just doing and see how that's. I worked with Karen Power as my mentor for this project, and we worked a lot on my scoring and how the challenges that I'm experiencing and how to kind of enhance that and anchor, provide more anchor and performance for performers. So I don't really finish pieces. They kind of start and evolve forever. But, you know, like there's each time I would do a performance of a piece, the next time I'll always enhance something or change it. And I don't feel like anything's ever finished. So for this work, I composed a piece called Tape Melt. And so the idea behind this is that I used to love the sound of a VCR player and a VHS tape, and you know, we must have had a terrible VCR player because I mean every time there would be a peak moment in a film or music or anything, it'd be a swell of sound and the player would get so overwhelmed that the tape would just be like melty, kind of drippy, warpy kind of sounds coming out of the player. I started to improvise on the flute one day and kind of found this sound world that was very almost captured the essence of that VHS overwhelmed drippy sound. So I wanted to see, could I emulate that, the essence of that, with other players and maybe bring in other tape players. So during COVID I was experimenting with certain tape player, recorder players and things like that. And if you have press play, you get that kind of sound where it screeches and stuff like that. Yeah. Oh yeah. I've done lots of different things on the tape players and wanted to bring those objects in and blend them with the musicians. Working with Kirkos has been amazing because all my pieces are just one giant experiment, and Kirkos are so experimental. They're very open and their essence is to kind of work with various different art forms. They always melt into other arts, and you really see that in the types of events and gigs that they're putting on. And so that works out really well for me because, you know, my stuff is always kind of like trying things out and And it's lovely to have a space with a group that are open to do that. Hopefully we'll continue evolving this piece together.
Susan Geaney, who's part of the Composer Hub project, talking about her work and her mentorship from composer Karen Power. And Karen is joining us along with Deirdre and Jennifer Walshe and Ann Cleare, who are also mentoring on the project. And 5 composers are part of the Composer Hub project. I mean, could we just tease out, I suppose, a little bit this idea of, not kind of forcing your own aesthetic onto the young composer or the early career composer. And Jenny, you made that wonderful reference to your teacher and talking about the aesthetic closet. I mean, are there times, Deirdre, where you do sort of have to hold back a little bit? And as Karen was talking about, the student maybe, or the younger composer is not quite ready to hear what you think they need to know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the role I feel is very much not just for the studies, but for the well-being of the students. So, you're often there just as a sounding board for something that may not be anything to do with the music at all. And often I'll judge that moment and maybe not have a formal situation where there's a lesson, but maybe arrange to meet socially or have a coffee and just have a walk and talk through something. One of the biggest mentor moments for me in my life was I studied with Per Nogar in Copenhagen. And I remember when I got there, I was a student. He had a party and invited Paul Ruders and Hans Abrahamsson and Ben Sørensen and all these, what I had perceived as really famous composers before I got there. And there was something incredibly warm and open about him doing that and them all coming. And I was a student, and it gave me a lot of confidence about the notion of what a composer is. So maybe this sort of creating other environments that are not just that kind of world of I'm going to tell you what to do, but opening up. I often go to Tate Gallery with the students and we just have a discussion about other things. And I think it's that you have to establish an element of trust, but also to be aware of what do they want from you as a mentor. And that isn't something that you can ask them. That's something that has to come out of several months of working with someone.
It's interesting that you talk about that, maybe going for a coffee or going to the Tate Gallery and this kind of different dynamic rather than the kind of, formal lesson. I was reading somewhere where James Macmillan gave an interview many, many years back, and he referred to the fact that Peter Maxwell Davies had attended some of his premieres. So he had never had a teacher-student relationship with Peter Maxwell Davies, but this seemed to give him, confidence that Peter Maxwell Davies was attending his premieres and kind of keeping an eye on how his career developed. I'm just wondering, Anne, Jenny, do you have any kind of experience of that? When you were an early career composer, of someone really keeping an eye on your development?
I don't know. Outside of, I suppose, immediate circles, it's hard to say. I'd have to think, Evonne. I don't have any great stories.
You had some very influential teachers, though, Anne, when you were in Harvard. I suppose that's the kind of, support that you would have come through.
I definitely have. I've had great teachers and teachers who have been very generous and very, I suppose, like really honest about what it's like to be a composer, like how difficult it is to be an artist. And it's been great to have that kind of honesty to work with, because it is a very difficult career, without doubt. It's very, very rewarding, but very difficult. And sometimes people just need to talk about that. Like a lot of students I work with, it's quite traumatizing for them to show their work publicly. That alone can take up a lot of lessons, just the after effects of a public outing for some of their work. So yeah, you're often kind of just offering advice on that as well, and how to deal with it. And I mean, not that I have perfect answers, but just for them to know that what they're feeling is very standard. It's something you kind of have to learn to cope with, and kind of move on from. So I think environments, maybe more like university ones, can be a little bit more protective in some way, but they kind of prepare you then for the outside world where you're not as kind of cocooned.
Well, let's hear from
Seán O'Donnell, who you've mentored, Anne, and he speaks very warmly about the fact that you've kind of given him lots of food for thought with regard to the video element of his piece.
My name is Seán O'Donnell, and I'm a composer based in Kerry. At the moment, most things that I'm doing are based on transcription. So, in a broad sense, what changes as you transcribe or translate one thing into another thing. In this project specifically, I am experimenting with transcribing. Purely visual means as instructions for the players. The score is will be a collection of drawings and paintings and collages based on Baroque dance notation. This could change every time as well. You could say, right, the top right corresponds to register. And the piece is it's going to be a video piece with a soundtrack.
Yeah, I can hear it.
Yeah, so like, obviously, working with Kirkos Ensemble is always great. They're amazing, and their enthusiasm and approach is always very inspiring. And for me, it's very inspiring because I know I can ask them to try anything. So in this workshop setting, especially because I'm trying, for me, that's something that's quite experimental. It's been amazing to be working with them, and I really have no idea how it's going to turn out, which is exciting, but it means you have to be open to it sharply changing directions constantly. I've also been working with Ann Cleare as a mentor during the project, which has been fantastic, and Ann has got has really keen ideas on the visual aspects as well, so I found it very, very helpful for the process.
Seán O'Donnell, who is one of the early career composers taking part in the Composer Hub project with our Ensemble-in-Residence, Kirkos, and we're having a chat with the mentors in that project. Jenny, can I come to you and just to go back to, I suppose, people who were supportive of you in your early career and maybe sort of, I suppose, fundamental composition lessons that you might have had, or maybe Damascus moments that were, part of a lesson or part of a coffee with maybe another composer?
I think it's funny. It's funny for you to talk about this. It's funny for me to talk about this today because my studio behind me is in a total shambles because I'm trying to organize my archive, and so I'm coming across handwritten critiques of early pieces I wrote, devastating handwritten critiques, and I'm looking at this stuff now with a distance and thinking to myself, how would I have taught me? Like when I started getting composition lessons in like 93, I was given a list of composers. Michael Tippett was the first name on the list and told, go look at the work of these composers, and so I think probably the first Damascus moment for me, like certainly when I studied with Kevin Volans, and that was very it was like something out of a film. Like we used to go over to his house and he cooked dinners and like we ate polenta. We didn't know what polenta was. Do you know what I mean? So it was sort of like a cultural capital education. You know what I mean? I mean, we drank the poor man dry as well, so it's sort of, it was very these sort of salon style lessons that lasted for 8 hours with, 8 of us all misspelling Alvin Lucier's name because we'd never heard of him ever in our education. So, that was important. And also going, when I first started studying with Amnon, because the very first lesson I ever had with him, he said to me, go away and I want you to listen to the music of Meredith Monk, and I want you to write 3 etudes for person. And there was just something in that that gave me permission to be myself, just in that 3 etudes for person. But I do believe that, like, I do believe it's about community. Like, I don't like this hierarchical thing of the teacher and the student. I actually really like teaching in more informal ways, because I think that you've got composers who are maybe more, you know, they're longer in the tooth, or they've just been doing this longer, and maybe they have advice or equipment they could loan younger people, or just even life advice. And so certainly for me, I've always loved, even as I get older, making friends with artists and composers who are older than me or have more experience than me. So for me, meeting Vivian Dick, you know, some years ago was a really big deal, and getting to know Alice Maher and people like that, where I felt like, here are these people who, they're older than me, they're not necessarily in the same art form, but like, I can see what it is to build a life. Because I think this is the thing, is how do you do this and be happy over the course of your life? I know a lot of composers who are older and are very successful and extremely bitter and extremely unhappy and extremely resentful. I don't want to live like that. Do you know? So seeing people like, when I was younger, seeing Marianne Amiche do a gig in Chicago, it was the loudest gig I've ever been at in my life. But she EQ'd everything so perfectly that my ears weren't ringing. She actually blew all the fuses in the venue. That's how loud it was. And she's there with these like this long, you know, curtain of gray hair, just her complete, amazing, wacky, genius self, you know, and seeing somebody and thinking, that's how you can live. That's how you can live through your life. And Tony Conrad as well would be another person. So I think it's about community, and as soon as you have any little bit of money to your name, you know, you should support the younger crowd, buy their albums, you know, go to their shows, like, you know, give them a kind word, because we were all that person nervous after a show, do you know? So that's what I think about in terms of, it's just that we keep trying to build community. And as we get older, it's a privilege to get this old. You know, it's a privilege and I say that just because, you know, I've had a very good friend died recently, you know, and so I just think even in your 40s, every year is a privilege that you get that time. So why not enjoy it, and why not spread any good stuff that comes your way? Why not give it back to the community as much as you can, you know? So, I mean, I think you've done that with CMC. You guys have created this sense of community that a lot of other music information centers don't quite have in the same way. Maybe it's because we're a small country, but I think it's also because you're great. Do you know? And no, but I'm serious, because it's like, that's why we're all here on this call, because we all believe in the mission. Everybody nod. Don't you agree with me, ladies? You know?
Let's hear from Darragh Kelly now, Jenny. He's very much looking forward to being mentored by yourself over the next few weeks.
I'm Darragh Kelly, a composer and performer from Ireland living in London at the moment. My work could best be described perhaps as music theatre, taking in elements of digital technologies and the internet. The piece I'm working on with Kirkos is titled FOD, and plays with both the vertical space in the ensemble and the space between the performers and the audience. It exists at the moment as a kind of constellation of loosely related movements, one involving a Snapchat filter of a potato that became popular over lockdown. Another deconstructs a jig on the fiddle, with Tom of Kirkos deconstructing the dance of the jig with a large piece of wood as a prop. Another movement to be worked out in the future when we're in the same space together involves instrument covers and protectors that have become available during the pandemic. These cover the flute and the bell of the horn and can come up to a person's shoulder. So I'm playing with the idea of replacing the material that is available online with green screen material and manipulating that in post to get some interesting effects. Musically, the piece takes a cue from its title, FOD, and focuses on a kind of zombie D major tonality, but tonality firmly as second nature, as artifactual. looking at how a D major chord can be a kind of cryptogram, not as it once used to be of maybe modernity, but whatever you want to call what came after that. I'm also really looking forward to having Jennifer Walshe work with me on moulding and shaping the piece. Geaney has been a real touchstone for so many younger composers and performers, and I think her advice will be invaluable to me. The ensemble and Sebastian have been so incredibly supportive and open to the strange kind of detritus that has fallen out of my brain and onto the page at the moment.
Then we switch into flow one bit. I think Sebastian section.
So it's just a drum and then the piano opens its eyes and then flow one place.
Yeah, that's how it's working on my head.
Cool.
I'm quite interested in exploring the kind of unity of the artwork across its multiple material instantiations, be it in a video we record in December or a possible future live performance. So it's become inherently kind of modular and a kind of movable feast with pieces to be taken out and put back in, but hopefully remaining cohesive to a certain extent.
Darragh Kelly, who is also part of the Composer Hub project and being mentored by Jennifer Walshe. Karen, can I come to you to talk about maybe some very key people that have helped and encouraged you in your younger days as a composer?
It took me years and years and years and years to find my place in the world. And I suppose earlier when I talked about, about teaching or mentoring, I think subconsciously this is something that I keep with me, this very idea that every single person learns and experiences learning in different ways. And so as mentors and as teachers, I think, we it's our job to be aware of that and to sort of try and facilitate that in every way we can. So yeah, I guess like a key moment would have been the Ennis Composition Summer School, because I studied C sound with Michael Alcorn and met Michael for the first time, and we all bunked off on a Sunday and dropped microphones down the cliffs of Moher. And that was my first time ever doing anything electroacoustic. And well, obviously that has informed my practice. As recently as a few years ago, visiting Peter Ablinger in his studio, long conversations with Pauline Oliveros. These things they're happening still, and I hope that they will continue to happen. And they're all key moments to whatever is next. And as Jenny said, we're all very, very lucky to be doing what we do. And I totally agree with her about the next generation. And, it's really important that we offer some light, because it can be a very, very dark time when you're trying to figure out who you are and what it is you do. So thank you again for facilitating this. It's been great.
Let's hear from one of the next generation, as you call them, Ultan O'Brien, who's also part of the project and is being mentored by Deirdre Gribbin.
I'm Ultan O'Brien, and this year, 2020, I'm one of the emerging composers for Contemporary Music Centre, CMC. So it's really as part of that I'm working on this piece, or how this started. This piece called Night Owl for Kirkos Ensemble. And it is for the full ensemble, which means flute, violin, horn, cello, and a tom. And Mr. Tom Rosengrave, who is an actor, but for this piece he's an actor, a singer, a dancer, an improviser, a maker, a conductor for a little bit, and most importantly, an owl.
Spirit animal. Yeah, I'm an owl. Large eyes, cute perception, a cute face. Yeah, it is. Came up with that one myself, yeah.
There's definitely going to be a version of it ready by December of this year, or so the goal is. But I want to extend that. I want to still see that as a development and extend it right into 2021 to line up with some other production opportunities. Very different working with the actor, Tom, who's great, and the musicians in a way. Because I don't necessarily treat the text too different from the way I'd create the music and the various different approaches to it. What I did notice is that I definitely I know the sound of the music, of course, before it's written, and there's a sense that musicians are then competing with that sound. There's a standard already, and you're trying to lead them to that sound, but you're also working together and it's changing as it goes on, but there is that standard there. Whereas for the text, there wasn't really, because it was always a written text. It wasn't ever performed. And just watching Tom, the way he embodied it, and the way he said the words, the way he interpreted it, and the way he moved to it, was really interesting. The kind of things we'll be doing it now, we'll be playing like a bit of this. There's a bit of that from, I have them out here. A little bit of Buddha. That actually is related to this. And of course, this kind of synthesizer too, which is used for a different installation altogether. Okay. We have a very clear idea of it after those workshops, and I'm looking forward to that being interrupted and changed again when we get back to it in December. But in the meantime, there is so much to do. On those meetings with them, can't stress how valuable that is. Yeah.
Ultan O'Brien talking about his work as part of the Composer Hub project, which is with the CMC Ensemble-in-Residence, Kirkos Ensemble, and he's being mentored by you, Deirdre, and that will take place over the next few weeks. But I just wanted to come back to something that Karen said there about, even in recent years, conversations that she has with composers and with other artists that are encouraging and kind of create this sense of community. I mean, is that still the case for you as well, Deirdre? Even though, all four of you are very established, very highly regarded, big commissions that all of you have received. But Deirdre, would you still feel that it's important to link with other artists and discuss?
Absolutely. I love also the whole sense of the communication with performers, because performers don't have to play new music, or they often really want to have a sense of involvement in that, which isn't just we've all been in situations where our music is just given to performers and there's that resistance. But I will build up my own sort of relationship with someone before I write for them, but also really feeding on what they have to do. And I think that's something that I would like to really foster with younger composers as well, not to be afraid of musicians, which I was when I first started out, because musicians ask you very direct questions, and we think in a very kind of esoteric and often cryptic, I do anyway, cryptic way, but it's a practical answer. And some of the things that you need to really sort of think about is how you communicate. I'm sort of slightly going off the point there, but the community for me is quite big. It's the arts practitioners who make music in schools, who work with young people with disabilities, who I love being in those situations as well, because I think that the potential for bringing in people who may not even think that they're composers, who are coming along to say, I'm a composition student, please mentor me. But I just think about the kind of schools workshops that I've done with kids from Deptford. I remember Dwayne from Deptford asking Steve Reich how much he got paid for something, and I thought, well, that's a great question, because he's considering that as a potential career for himself. I don't know what happened to Dwayne from Deptford, but it was a very funny moment. But I think about the number of young people that I've worked with in terms of saying, you know, this is new music, and it's something that you can actually do as well. And it's not your typical person. So that for me is really a big interest as well, that sense of what is the community and how big can it be.
And we're going to hear from one of the early career composers in that community, Áine Mallon from Armagh.
My name is Áine Mallon and I'm a composer based in Manchester. So I'm writing a piece for the Kirkos Ensemble that's scored for French horn and baritone voice. The reason that I chose these instruments was really I wanted breath to be at the core of my piece. The breath is used in a very focused way in the piece, so the performers will be actively inhaling and exhaling, and the musical content will grow out of the breath. In a similar way, the audience will be encouraged to mindfully breathe, and their breath, along with the performers, will be guided through a video. As part of this project, I've had 2 fantastic workshops with the Kirkos Ensemble themselves. So the first workshop was really to test out ideas, so to try out musical material and try out new things, and also to really hone and refine the musical material that I had already written. And the second workshop was really to dive into the meditative aspects of the piece and test out the idea of the shared experience between the performer and the audience. So Hannah and Tom and Sebastian were really welcoming of my ideas, but they were also really receptive to the musical material and would suggest things, you know, oh, maybe try this or try that, which was really, really helpful in allowing the piece to develop.
How much time you have before you get to read out and stuff, because sometimes people like read too quickly and then they're like stressed that they have to hold it for so long. Yeah, like the meditation kind of time, like if they like know that the pacing is coming forward.
I also had a mentorship with Donnacha Dennehy, which was absolutely incredible. We spoke about notation and how that, in a very physical way, might allow more space for breath, along with other wider musical concepts that we discussed as well. The great thing that I'm finding with this process is it's very, it's based on development. So we've now got a period of time where we can let things settle and I can return to the piece in a period of a few weeks with fresh eyes. And in that time, the music itself will have developed organically and I can come back to it and maybe adjust little things.
That's Áine Mallon there, who is our 5th composer in the Composer Hub project, our Ensemble-in-Residence project with Kirkos Ensemble. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat with the 4 of you ladies on this evening on Culture Night.
Huge thanks to
Deirdre Gribbin, Jennifer Walshe, Karen Power and Ann Cleare on this Culture Night 2020.